New York City is arguably one of the fine dining capitals of the world, a place where many chefs come to make a name for themselves and prove themselves in the process. That's why I'm here to check in with Chef Adrienne Cheatham. Now, Adrienne has worked in some of the finest restaurants in the city. In doing so, Adrienne has had to face head-on some of the inherent racist and sexist practices that happen in those kitchens. Through Adrienne's experiences, she has decided to step out on her own, forge her own path, cook the food that celebrates her heritage, and tell the stories that she wants to tell. This is Taste the Culture. What's kind of this overall Adrienne origin story? I mean, you had an amazing career. Like, what got us here?
I grew up in restaurants.
Okay.
My mom worked front of house, and we'd get burgers, do our homework, and then when the restaurant started getting busy at dinner time, help run these plates,
Right.
go mop the bathroom. You know, it was just such a family environment to me that restaurants were kind of where I always knew I would end up.
Yeah.
So I always knew that, like, when I was 5, I told my parents I wanted to be a chef.
Chef Adrienne Cheatham is cut from a different cloth. Not only has she worked in some of the most prestigious kitchens in the world, but as a black female chef, she's challenged every preconception the fine dining world has to offer. Today, I'm meeting with Adrienne to cook some food, gain some perspective from Adrienne and a few of her minority chef friends, and explore how they're working to address the aspects of fine dining culture that have made it difficult for minorities to succeed in the past. Before we start cooking, Adrienne takes me to an iconic destination in her neighborhood, historic Marcus Garvey Park. So what got you from that 5-year-old that knew you wanted to be a chef to working for Eric Repair, for working for Marcus Samuelson, to being in New York?
That was a little bit of a curve there. I wanted to go to 4-year culinary right after high school. Okay. But my parents were not fans of that.
Right.
My mother had a practical response. Cook for a few years, then when you are too old to work in the kitchen,
Exactly.
have a backup plan.
Yeah.
My father said, I didn't fight for civil rights for you to become a burger flipper.
Adrienne's love for the kitchen persisted. However, the kitchen hasn't always been a kind place in return, especially for women, and especially for women of color. In recent years, Adrienne's been focused on her pop-up series, SundayBest, celebrating what she calls black cuisine, which is often overlooked in high-end establishments. So at some point in your career, you decided to become very outspoken about the inequities that we've both experienced when it comes to, women in the kitchen, people of color, black people especially. Was there ever just this line in the sand moment where you were like, I can't take this anymore, and moved you to the next phase of your career?
Yes, I was not always so outspoken because I wasn't comfortable.
Right.
I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to be seen as different by drawing attention to it. And then there was one time, well, there were a few times.
Come on, let's be real.
But this one time, my chef threw a double tall 6-pan straight at my head. And if I hadn't moved like that and it chipped a tile behind me, I would have gotten hit with it. And at that time, I was also executive sous chef.
So you've had a lot of formative and, in some cases, traumatizing experiences. And at some point, you kind of took a hard pause. You evaluated your career, where you wanted to go. You have your SundayBest series. What was that transitional period like for you?
It was really inspiring but scary also. What lit the fire was that I saw Southern cuisine, black people, black food not getting the respect that it deserved.
Right.
So it was more like I want to prove that the food of African Americans, which is American cuisine, built by enslaved Africans who worked the lands, worked the fields, worked the kitchens. We have a diaspora that's reached around the world.
Right.
So why isn't our food being respected for the reach that it's had? Italian country cooking can be venerated and uplifted to a fine dining level.
Yep.
French humble country cooking that somebody's grandmother makes can. Why can't Southern?
100%.
Because it's associated with black people, it's always seen as something
Less than. With that, we're headed to the kitchen, prepping a miniature SundayBest for ourselves and a couple friends.
I always said I was mixed. It wasn't until I got around a majority white environment that instead of saying I'm mixed, I started saying I'm black.
Right.
We know that black people are not a monolith, but a lot of people I was around didn't realize that.
Right.
When they asked me what I was, I said, oh, I'm black. They said, no, but you're not like black. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, I'm blackish.
Yeah, like,
What's this restaurant that's not open right now, but what does it mean to you?
It's not open yet, but this is actually the restaurant of Melba Wilson, who is a pillar of Harlem.
Right.
She's let us use the kitchen today, so we don't have to cook in my little New York apartment.
Thank you, Melba.
Thank you, Melba.
What are we making today?
So we're gonna be making a few different dishes because we have a couple guests coming.
Yep.
You are going to be on Team Fish.
Of course.
Of course.
The new guys always got to clean the fish. All right.
Don't worry, I mean, I scaled them for you.
Oh,
They're clean.
thank
know?
you.
So for these, we're gonna do some fried porgies.
Switch with you here.
So porgies have always been kind of looked down upon because they're kind of seen as like poor man's fish.
Right.
AKA black cuisine.
Black cuisine. So I've heard you use that term black cuisine a lot. You know, a lot of people talk about soul food, they talk about West African cuisine, they talk about African American cuisine, but you often use black cuisine.
To me, they're pretty much the same thing. You can't talk about American cuisine without talking about the foodways of African Americans.
Is there some other examples as far as foods that you often use or that you would consider, you know, hyper black cuisine foods as you're holding the collard greens?
Right? Perfect timing for that. Well, when I was coming up in kitchens, and Justin, I'm not sure if this is the same for you, there was no discussion of African American ingredients.
No.
If I'm developing dishes for a menu at a French fine dining restaurant, I cannot put collard greens on. I can't
Never.
use okra in anything. It's like,
Why do you think that is?
I'm not
Still to
sure.
this
It's
day.
you know, it's partly because they're associated with being cheap and humble, and they've never been really given their respect.
Yep.
And I think, you know, a lot of the food in general hasn't been given respect. I mean, there is a technique to fried chicken.
Right.
You don't just fry chicken and it comes out delicious. Okra not only made it to the US, the slave trade went in both directions.
Right.
So you see okra in Lebanese cuisine. It's called bamia. You see it in India. Sorghum. Which we're using today.
I use a lot of sorghum.
Do you?
Bene seeds. I
Yes.
use a lot of bene.
We're using that today
Are we?
also. Yep.
You know, one story that I've always, you know, heard kind of about with the okra seed, even black-eyed peas, the women would smuggle those seeds in their hair. They'd wear their hair up, and they'd bring them on these slave ships for weeks and months and however long,
Yeah.
and then kind of slowly shake them out of their hair so they could, you know, plant their own
Yeah.
crops and have, you know, have some food that made them feel like home.
Sorry.
No.
Okay.
From Eric Repair to Marcus Samuelson, what are some of the similarities and differences from those kitchens, and what did you take away from each of those independently?
Both Eric Repair and Marcus travel extensively.
Right.
They've seen so many similarities, and they were able to swap things in, paying respect and homage to the culture that it originated in. And I really loved that because it really opened up my perspective that even working at a French restaurant, you can use mango, you can use jicama. So it was just so cool to see them interpret their cultures and their cuisines through a global lens.
So then when did you really lean into this food then? You know, and both of us started, you know, I wanted to do fine dining French food. I was gonna be a chef, had to be fine dining, had to be French. I wasn't doing soul food because in my experience, that was all they thought that we could cook, and that's all we were allowed to cook. But so when did you switch?
Just like you, for years, I kind of thought that I don't want to cook soul food because that's what they expect me to.
Right.
I wanted to be the black woman working at a Michelin fine dining restaurant. And I was very proud of that. Very, very proud of that. But when I saw that our cuisine wasn't getting the respect it deserves for both technique, flavors, everything, and just the credit for building this country, that's when I really wanted to spend more time doing research on it myself.
How does it feel now to be, you know, celebrating the food that you grew up on, that you've always wanted to share with people, and, you know, really never given the opportunity?
You know, to be honest, I hadn't thought about that, but it feels so damn good.
Good.
Like, it is such a beautiful feeling to know that, like, I don't have to be ashamed in a way, or I don't have to look at the food of my family as something that's less than. It's on par with everything else.
With Adrienne's direction, we've created a fine dining dinner from historically humble ingredients. Joining us are Adrienne's close friends, Chef Aisha Nurjaja of Shuka and Chef Jay Lee of Noan. The three of them have all worked in some of the most demanding restaurants in New York. Now, they excel at cooking the food that resonates with their cultures. And I've got to say,
oh my God.
sitting here surrounded by such accomplished, like-minded chefs is a special experience.
It was amazing cooking with you today. Your style's so unique and so familiar at the same time. So let's tell our guests what we're eating.
So tonight, guys, we are having fish fry, because that's classic, cornmeal battered, tossed in a little sorghum syrup and pepper jelly. We have hush puppies with pimento cheese. We have okra and tomato stew, also called bamia in the Middle East. We have our collard green salad. You don't have to cook collard greens forever. They're delicious, just marinated. A little bit of bene seed oil and radishes. And then we also have our grits a la kanji with andouille sausage and crispy garlic. And then last but not least, our collard green kimchi, because that's just one of my favorites.
It smells so delicious. I don't even know where to start.
Well, should we start?
Let's start
I think so.
Let's cook some food, and then let's talk about it.
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing that I run to when it hits the market are baby okra.
And when you were talking about this kanji, I felt like everyone's looking at me. I'm not Chinese.
You're not.
And then when the kimchi hit, I was like, look at me. But no, I'm just kidding.
What is your guys' relationship? How often you work together, see each other? How did this come together?
I'm just here for free food.
No, you guys are some of my favorite food people that I've had talks with.
Well, the food, when I took one bite of it, I just fell in love. There's so much love and soul in the food. I think I really understand what soul food means.
Right.
You find it in cultures where food is what kept the family strong to get through the tough times.
Yep.
And when I ate a bite of that, bite of the fish, everything here, it just hit right here. So I felt that.
That means a lot. I really appreciate hearing that, because to me, Southern food, while it's familiar to us, we all come from different backgrounds. And I love that we all can see ourselves and our culture reflected in what, to me, is Southern food.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I always think is so interesting is none of these ingredients, and in a good way, are very expensive.
Yeah.
Like that, your grits dish, how delicious, how satisfying, not only to the soul, but also to the belly.
And I love how the fish was served with the with the carcass. It's not just for decoration purposes. You would eat it.
You eat that?
Yep.
Yeah, and in Korean culture as well, we eat the heads, the tails, everything. You know, when I was a little kid, I would shy away from it, and my grandma would yell at me to eat it. You're so privileged. You don't understand what it was like. So when I see this fish, it reminds me of her too.
Is that a uniquely immigrant or marginalized community thought process when it comes to the way that we look at food?
I mean, I think so. I think, when I think about my grandparents talking about the Depression and what they went through and stuff like that, or they were immigrants, they would take every morsel. You know, we talk about as chefs nose to tail cooking, right? It's a luxury.
I remember growing up, my grandfather, who grew up in Mississippi and moved to Chicago, planted a garden in his backyard. He preserved everything.
Something we touched on earlier that, again, is I think very impressive and just kind of tells your story is how you've taken you went from Le Bernardin, cooking fine dining French, and then, went back to your roots, cooking the food that tells your story. You use a lot of those techniques you've learned along your journey and applied them to, again, these simple ingredients, to, again, these foods that represent our history and our family. When did you feel confident enough to start cooking the food that you love and that you wanted to share?
I think it's the evolution, right? Every day that we work toward being more ourselves is that you realize that each of these individual parts are part of who you are. It's very easy to shun sometimes your culture. I think you pick the parts of it that resonate with you. Our growth from cooks to chefs is a big one. At what point is that?
Right.
Sometimes you take your first chef job.
Right.
I remember that. I was not a chef.
You weren't a chef at that point.
I didn't know what a P&L was, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
I didn't know how much, how to do food costs and all the things, how to run a business, how much toilet paper we were using. COVID changed all of that, right? When you come back and reopen your restaurant, you have to know exactly what those things are.
I mean, that's a unique perspective. I mean, just for you guys in general. We're all, people of color at this table and have went through our own paths. Once you get over the hurdle of being not white, then there's the hurdle of also being a woman now in this kitchen. So where were your experiences and where do you see that now? I mean, both being powerful women in this field.
When I started so many years ago, there weren't that many female chefs. And I remember reaching out to people and saying, hey, my name's Aisha, I'm a young cook. I would just love to have a conversation with you, coffee or something. And nobody would ever get back to you.
Right.
It would be go out in the ether and then you would be zzz, nothing.
Right.
And I think I also remember meeting other females, and because there were such few of us, it was more cutthroat. Oh, well, we're not looking for people now.
It's we can't have another woman in the kitchen. Are you crazy? It's
yeah.
I barely got here.
Right.
When I was trying to open a restaurant 5 years ago, I couldn't get a single investor. They just didn't believe in the concept. It wasn't there for them. when they saw me, they don't have empathy. They don't believe in me the same way that they would in a young white male. They didn't identify with me because they were from different backgrounds.
For all intents and purposes, you are the risk.
Right.
You're female, you're black, and you're wanting to showcase a cuisine that they know nothing about.
Right.
No one else wants to invest in what we want to do. We're
Yeah.
underrepresented. So when I wanted to do a Korean American gastropub pocha concept, I couldn't find any investors. No one believed in it. So I had to, put in the money myself.
But I think, like, in the last few years, there is some change now. There's a lot less sacrifice today than there was back then. I mean, I remember working 80, 90, 100 hours.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to forge a better, work environment. And I think that we need to be part of that change, but I do think that change is happening. I think kitchens are getting back to being a little more fun.
Yeah.
You know?
And I've seen a lot of diversity. When I've eaten at Chouquette, I've seen a lot of diversity in the kitchen. Men, women, different ethnicities, and that's awesome to see that. I feel like different people from different backgrounds make a more empathetic, more understanding, more convivial environment.
Adrienne grew up in kitchens, and that's where she's always been the most comfortable. But the food that brought her the most comfort has rarely received its due credit. It's the food that built this country. Because let's be honest, Black cuisine is American cuisine. Through Adrienne's pursuit and advocacy of Black cuisine, she's become a guide for many people whose underrepresented foodways deserve the same level of respect. Spending time with Adrienne, Aisha, and Jay reaffirms the importance of cooking what feels right to you, no matter what anyone else says.
Even though we all are so different in our backgrounds, we are so connected in our careers, our paths, everything that's brought us through this industry. I've totally been through what you've been through. I've been through what both of you have been through as well. The fact that we know each other's experiences makes sure that when we are in our restaurants, in our pop-ups, in whatever, we see the people who don't look like us, but we see them as human beings who are like us.
Well, Chef Aisha, it was,
Really, honestly.
are hilarious. You are a beast. I want to do this again with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Anytime.
It was such a pleasure, my friend.
Chef, thank you
nice
so
to see
much
you.
for coming up to hang out with me today.
Jay.
Chef, thank you. It was a privilege of mine to be here.